Yes, hello there. This is the Armchair Fan Podcast, powered by UQ Sport. I'm Jamie Mitchell. Nice to have you on board, pun certainly intended, for today's chat with Olympic sailing hopeful Thomas Needham. Tom's an engineering and commerce student here at the University of Queensland, and he's also one of Australia's top sailing prospects. We'll deep dive into the journey so far, the art of sailing the daunting 49er dinghy, and the pursuit of winning Olympic gold. But before we do that, remember to rate, review and subscribe wherever you download the show. We certainly do appreciate the love and support. Alrighty then, let's get cracking. It's Tom Needham on the Armchair Fan Podcast. Hey Tom, thanks for coming in, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Good to see you.
So, I'd love to get a bit of a fly-on-the-wall view of what's it like to get on the water, but I guess to probably describe it and put the picture in the listener's mind, it's probably a good idea to kind of talk about this 49er dinghy that I mentioned in the intro. So, can you explain it? She's a big monster and it takes a few people to sail it.
Yeah, so the 49er, it's the men's Olympic skiff dinghy. So it's a two-person boat, 4.9 metres long, as per the name, and there's about 60 metres squared of sail area. 2 trapezes, and it goes up to 25 knots, so it's a fast boat. So
knots, I think we're talking around like 40, 45 k's, roughly?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's about right.
So you sail with a partner, so your partner is Joel Turner. Let's talk about when you're on the boat. What's happening out there? Are you working in tandem? Are you the skipper? Is he the skipper? Are you directing? Are you putting up sails? How does all that work?
Yeah, on the boat, we have two sort of quite clearly divided roles. I'm the skipper and Joel's the crew. Joel's from the Gold Coast. Started sailing with him 2 or 3 years ago now. And yeah, on the boat, so as the skipper, my job's to steer the boat and sort of decide our route around the race course. It's not like a running race where you're going in one lane. You can sort of take a million different routes through the race course. Joel's job is mostly to do with our boat speed and trimming the sails and things like that. So he's got the more physical role, and I guess I've got the more decision-making role.
So looking at the wind, monitoring other boats, I mean, can you talk me through the decision-making? What are you looking for when you're on the water?
Yeah, exactly right. So we always want to sail in as much wind as possible. And when you look out on the bay, you can often see little dark patches of wind, and generally that means that there's more wind right there. We call that a gust. So we're generally trying to look for these gusts and changes in angle of the wind as well to sail the shortest course around the racetrack.
Can you maybe talk me through some of the calls that you and Joel might have? I mean, it's loud, wind's blustering. I mean, I assume it's got to be pretty quick, prompt communication. How does it work?
Yeah, exactly. So generally manoeuvres are the most difficult things to do. So when we're turning the boat, things like a tack or a jibe and the sails are coming across, they're flapping. It's very noisy. So like you said, very important to be clear and concise. What
about tinkering on the run? So let's say you made a call, Joel's having issues, changing some settings, sails, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Does the conversation go back and forth around a bit of a plan B?
Yeah, there's definitely overlap in our roles as well. So if one person's struggling with their job or it's a difficult day for sailing, there is plenty of overlap in our roles, and always got to be adaptable in sailing. You can't really predict what's going to come a long time in advance, so always changing on the run.
How physically and mentally taxing is it when you're on the boat? I'm assuming you must be, your head's getting battered from spray and wind gusts and whatnot. I assume it must be just mentally draining to try and keep up with it. But can you put us in the shoes of a sailor? What are you feeling when you're on the water?
Yeah, on our boat, it's sort of the nature of the boat is that we get quite wet on board. We're always getting sprayed, and it's quite prone to tipping over as well. So a capsize and things like that, but we try and avoid that. Other than that, yeah, always decision making. So you're always having to think about what's next, what's coming, where are the other boats, what can we do to go faster and things like that. And then on the boat, there's plenty of load in all the ropes of all the sails and things like that. So yeah, plenty of time in the gym and riding bikes and things like that to sort of keep our fitness up to scratch.
So you talked about capsizing. Does it happen often and crashing into other boats, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you really hope it doesn't. But when the conditions get really gnarly, it is a real possibility. Crashing into boats is something that you avoid at all costs because we sail quite expensive boats, and it's not pretty if you have a crash.
What are we talking about dollar figure for a 49er?
Yeah, so brand new, sort of off the shelf, about $45,000. Wow. So it's quite an expensive class.
Any significant capsize moments or crashes for you, or any sort of scary moments on the water?
Yeah, plenty of capsizes, especially when learning. Fortunately, haven't had many crashes into other boats, but the capsizes is relatively harmless to the boat. You're just sort of hitting the water, but for the people on board, you can fly around the front and hit wires and hit the boat, and so it is quite dangerous. But like I said, try and avoid that.
Is it mostly a capsize situation? Is it mostly just getting the wind conditions completely wrong, over or under compensating, perhaps?
Yeah, so you might be sailing around the race course, and when you're going downwind, so when you're sailing with the wind, we pull up an extra sail, and that's when we go really fast. And we don't have much volume, you say, in the bow, so there isn't much buoyancy at the front of the boat. So if there's a wave that maybe we don't quite see right, or it might just be too big of a wave, we can easily nosedive and fly around the front.
When you're competing, I mean, how long are you actually out on the water? What's a standard race length in time-wise?
Yeah, standard race is around 30 to 45 minutes, and then we're generally doing 3 or so races each day. Yeah. Obviously, there's a gap between each race as well, so a normal day on the water is around 4 hours.
Like, how do you recover when you've finished the race? Are you sore? I assume upper body's pretty sore. Quite a physical thing. What is that feeling like for you?
Yeah, definitely, and as with pretty much all sports, you're trying to recover as quickly as you can. So getting in fluids and getting in food as soon as you finish the race. Fortunately, we have a coach out there most of the time who has a little motorboat, and we raft up with them, and he gives us a lunchbox and our water bottles and things like that.
So you'll compete, you'll hang out on the water, coach will come out with some food.
Yeah.
Do you do a bit of a debrief?
Yeah, totally. That's one of the most important things. We instantly chat about how we raced the race itself and how fast we were going and what we need to do next time to go better and all sorts of things. And we sail quite a technical boat. There's plenty of adjustments that we can make. And so it's an important conversation to have about whether we're set up correctly for the conditions that we're sailing in.
When you're feeding back to the coach, I guess my question is around like how much input can a coach have being onshore and watching from afar? So do you need to really download a lot of experience for the coach to then interpret, or can the coach really make a bit of a call and see what's going on from afar, if that makes sense? So generally our coach is on the water as well in a boat. If the coach was on land, it's quite a difficult spectator sport, just because we have to be a fair way away from the land. But when he's out on the boat, he gets quite a good view of the race, and he follows. The coaches are allowed within 100 metres of the boundaries of the race course, and they can go up and down the sides and they sort of see what's going on. But there is definitely a big aspect of on the boat, and only myself and Joel will sort of feel how that's going. Yeah, so tell me about your partnership with Joel. So how did you guys link up, and I guess what makes your partnership so special?
Yeah, like you said, 2-person boat. I started sailing with Joel in 2018, right sort of halfway through 2018. He split up with his previous sailing partner. They both sort of came to a mutual agreement that it would be best for them to change who they were sailing with. And Dave, he incidentally then sailed with his brother. And so Joel was sort of left with no one to sail with at that time. And I'd been training at home, and I was sailing with another guy from home called Nathaniel, and he decided that he wanted to become a pilot. So he stopped sailing, and then sort of Joel and I were both sort of by ourselves and joined together, and sort of since then have been working together as a really good team. And we've come along in leaps and bounds. So
you're both in the Australian Sailing Squad, which is the development program of the Australian sailing team. That's essentially the pathway from elite youth competition to Olympic level. But how much time do you and Joel spend together?
Yeah, we spend probably too much time together, to be honest. We're sailing pretty much 5 days a week, which is around 3 hours each day on the water. In the gym 3 days a week, and then also riding bikes together 2 or 3 days a week.
You've answered a couple of my questions that I had for you, so I'm interested in the side away from sailing, but let's just talk about the on-water stuff. So 5 days a week. Is the 3 hours just out on the water, or are we talking about preparation before and after you get back? Yeah,
so 3 hours on the water. Yeah. So there's prep before that, and then a bit of a de-rig afterwards.
What does that look like, or how long is that process?
Yeah, so the general setup is sort of turn up to the yacht club. I sail out of the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron in Brisbane, and you've got to pull the sails up, you've got to check all the wire tensions, that make sure they're all right, and pull the sails up, put all the ropes on, put everything together. It takes about 30 minutes to set the boat up. Wheel it in down the boat ramp, hop in, and off you go.
Are you mechanically minded and that sort of stuff? Do you enjoy the tinkering side of things?
Yeah, I do enjoy that side, and you'll probably mention soon, but yeah, I'm doing engineering at uni as well. And so that's kind of the way that I like to think. And with the 49er, it being quite a equipment and technologically developing class, it's quite important to be able to have that side of logic and way of thinking to get the most out of the boat.
So you and Joel train out of the Queensland Academy of Sport. So it's training together. Is it the same program that you do together and just we're in together, we're a partnership, we do the same stuff?
Yeah, at the gym you're talking about, yeah, we have slightly different programs just because of the nature of our roles on the boat. Like I said, Joel, the crew, has a slightly more physical role, and my role is more about just being able to stay calm and cool under pressure. So the fitness required to do that, as well as after a big race day, not getting fatigued and being able to stay on your game.
So how much of a split is training, say, between strength and cardio work? What do you kind of put more of an emphasis on?
It's probably around 50-50 split. And fortunately, I enjoy going to the gym and I enjoy doing cardio and things like that, which is good for the sport.
Let's talk about that involvement with the Australian Sailing Squad. What is involved in training and hooking up with Australian coaches and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, what have been the key things that you've benefited from being part of this program?
Yeah, the Australian Sailing Squad and the Australian Sailing Team is a great institution, and they really help all the sailors within Australia, especially at the elite level. They provide coaches for the classes and support and management and all that sort of thing, physios, gym, everything like that. And there's a great group of 5 49ers in the Australian Sailing Squad, and we all train together. And when we go to Sydney to train with them and things like that, and we have the coach, Ewan McNichol, and we all work really closely together to sort of all try and get to the top.
So it's quite a interconnectedness with the Australian Sailing Team by the sounds of that.
Yeah.
Do you have any mentors that you try and gravitate towards?
Yeah, I've got plenty of mentors also at home. So my old head coach of the QAS, Ash Brunning, he's a great mentor for me, and there's plenty of guys and girls at home that I really lean on to sort of help me make decisions and help me along the path of where I'm going with my sailing.
A couple of random questions that came to mind just in researching for the pod.
Yeah.
Do you ever get seasick?
I actually do a little bit. So when I do yacht races, so a separate boat to what I sail at the Olympics, so yachts being the big ones that you might see 50, 60, 70 foot out on the ocean. If it's not much wind and big lumpy waves, I might get a little bit seasick, but not too bad. It doesn't really hold me back.
Actually, a question I have about training on the water before we move on to some other stuff. So in competition, you're racing against other boats. In training, are you able to simulate any kind of competition stuff? Or, how does it work? Are you on your own in a boat, or do you try and go in a couple of groups to try and get a bit of competition element, if that makes sense?
Going in a group is for sure the best way to advance your skills. We can practice racing, and because we have, like I said, this great group of 5 boats in the Australian Sailing Team, we can sort of simulate our own races, run our own mini races and things like that. We can work on speed together, and if you need to work on your boat handling, you can probably do that solo. But the racing side of things is, you need the other boats.
Can you talk to me about the sensation of leaning out over the boat? I always find it fascinating watching crew members just stretched out, obviously moving the weight to one side of the boat. But can you talk me through that? Because it just looks utterly fascinating and exhilarating.
Yeah, it's great fun. The main principle is because, unlike a yacht, we don't have a keel. So if we just sat in the middle of the boat would instantly tip over because of the force of the wind. So we have to sort of counteract that with our body weight. And in the 49er, we do what's called trapezing. So not like gymnastics, but we wear a harness with a little hook. And there's a wire that comes from the top of the mast, and we clip into that and sort of run off the side of the boat and hook into that. And that's what holds us out of the water. And we're sort of flying 30 centimetres above the water. Yeah,
that was my next question. So safety-wise, what happens? So you're obviously attached to it. So you're saying you've got to move a lot.
Yeah.
Are you honestly flipping and flopping between sides of the boat like every, 30 seconds, a minute? How is that? Is it like that?
Yeah, especially in training and when you're racing, obviously every time you do a maneuver, so the boat can't sail straight into the eye of the wind. So we sail at about 45 degrees either side from the wind, and to get to the top mark, we have to tack back and forth. And every time we tack, we unhook, run across the boat, swing out on the new side and go again.
How do you find the time and the clear-headedness to then calculate what's happening when there's so much physically happening with moving around the boat? That must be an art in itself.
Yeah, that's the difficult part, is sort of keeping a bird's eye view on the race course and keeping an eye on where all your competitors are, what the wind's doing, how your boat's going. You've really got to have 10 eyes in the back of your head and sort of looking around all the time.
When did it come to you that being a skipper and having that responsibility is suited to your sailing skills? About what point in your career did you kind of pick that up?
Yeah, so I started sailing quite late, actually.
You're 14, right?
Yeah, when I was 14, I started with school sailing at Brisbane Grammar School.
Yep.
And I quickly progressed into what's called a laser, which is a single-handed boat. And yeah, so as a one-person boat, you're doing the sails and steering and tactics all by yourself. And I guess that sort of gave me a good base and good fundamental skills when I moved into the 49er in steering and keeping your head out of the boat and making the decisions myself.
Was that a major step up? So in terms of speed, I mean, we mentioned before, 25 knots sort of top speed for a 49er. Yep. That's about 45 Ks. And at the radial, you're probably looking at, 16, 15 knots?
Oh, if that. Yeah, 10 knots. Yeah.
Double the speed.
Yeah.
Was it a sizable jump up?
Yeah, it's a huge change, and also going from sailing by yourself to having a partner on board with you, the communication and everything like that changes. So there's the G-force itself. So every time we go through turns, there's quite a substantial amount of G-force in the 49er, whereas on the laser, so the class that I grew up sailing, you go quite slow, and it's a lot easier to get across the boat and things like that. So
laser is also a class that's raced at the Olympics as well. In terms of the Gs, do you have any rough idea of how much force is going through your body, like a maximum sort of level, or even just a bit of a, normal load that you feel?
Yeah, I wouldn't know the exact calculation, but effectively when you're pulling in from the side of the boat, you're probably doing similar to a chin-up. So you're doing a chin-up to get into the boat each time, effectively.
It's crazy. I'm out. I can't do it. We talked a little bit about it, but you could probably expand on it. But what are your main strengths as a sailor? I mean, you talked about the aspect of being able to process so much and have 10 eyes in the back of your head. But where else are you strong as a sailor, if you could put it into layman's terms for someone not familiar with the sport?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, I really like the technical side of things and being able to analyse your race. So I really enjoy having a good debrief process. And after a race, sort of quickly being able to think, for the next race, what can we do? What can we do better? And I feel like that's one of my strengths, is being able to hit a reset button, whether it's after a bad race or even after a good race, and just saying, let's go again and sort of try and do the best that you can in the next race, because there isn't much time.
How do you move on so quick? I mean, some athletes talk about stewing on bad results for days. Is it perhaps a nature of the sport that you're out on a water?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just reflect, you know what I mean? You've just got to move on. Is it kind of like that, or do you have any sort of traits or techniques to move on quickly?
Yeah, I guess I don't have any specific techniques. I just find that naturally I seem to just be able to get over setbacks quite easily when on the race course and things like that. So if we have a bad race, I just try not to dwell on what's happened and just sort of think objectively, what did we do wrong there and how can we fix that for the next race? And realistically, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you're happy or sad, it's if you're going well or...
Hey, weather-wise, what's a sailor's worst nightmare?
Worst nightmare? Oh, it depends. Worst nightmare, you could get stuck in glass and have no wind. That could be your worst nightmare.
Yeah, true.
But your other worst nightmare, it could be a huge storm and lightning and 50 knots. And
that's interesting. I wasn't thinking about it from the days where there is no condition.
Yeah.
Does that mean you've just got to work harder tactically?
Yeah, so there's wind limits for our class. So we don't sail in under 4 knots, right. Which is 6 kilometres an hour of wind speed. We don't sail in less than that, and generally over 30 knots, so around 50 kilometres an hour of wind speed. So that's kind of our boundaries of racing.
Do you ever get scared on the water?
Oh, I mean... Yeah, when it's really windy and really wavy, it can be quite dangerous. And so you're always worried about the possible implications. But if you think about that too much, you're never going to push yourself and you're never going to push the boat. And generally, the slower you go, the more dangerous it actually is. You've got to keep your foot on the pedal the whole time. Otherwise, that's when you run into strife.
Do you ever get to a point where you actually have to sacrifice performance and speed to protect yourself?
It's in training that is often the case, and also looking after equipment. So you wouldn't go training if it's blowing and dogs off chains. If it's just absolutely howling, you wouldn't go training just because of the potential injury and equipment risk. But in a race, you've just got to push it. If the race committee's running the race, you're going sailing. So it's as simple as that.
I'm keen to touch on some of the international locations that you've sailed, but first, is Australia a unique place to sail? Do we have conditions that are very unique to us that you don't find anywhere else?
Yeah, I think we're unbelievably lucky in Australia with the conditions that we have. We have what's called a sea breeze, so most days we get 15 knots in the afternoon and sunny, nice weather. It doesn't get too cold, so it's just glamour sailing conditions here.
Yeah, how do you go in the cold? I know you've competed in the UK and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
do you struggle?
I was born in England, actually, so I guess that helps a little bit. So I don't mind the cold, and we wear good wetsuits and a beanie and things like that when it gets really cold. But for sure, you still get shivers when you're racing. And
let's talk about some of the bucket list places you've been to and some of the favourite locations. I know you've sailed in Weymouth in England, where was the venue for the 2012 Olympics.
Yeah.
Where have you been sailing, and what have you enjoyed?
Yeah, Weymouth was cold. That was the coldest event that we've done. But leading into that, we sailed in Palma, in Spain, and that was great conditions over there. And then we moved to Genoa in Italy, and we had a regatta there. Lake Garda in Italy was probably my favourite sailing venue, and that's pretty common among sailors. It's known as one of the best venues in the world. Also sailed in Kiel, and plenty of places all across the world. So
before we started recording, I had a few just completely silly questions about how you get the boat around.
Yeah.
But it actually led to a pretty interesting chat around having a boat located overseas. Can you expand on that? Yeah,
it's a logistical nightmare, our sport, especially living in Australia. We're quite isolated from the main competition, which is Europe. So the national competition within Australia isn't really anywhere near as important as the overseas competitions. And with that being the case, we have to move boats around overseas. We send shipping containers overseas with equipment and gear, and throughout most of the time we have an Australian boat, and then we've got a boat stored over in Barcelona in Europe. And then once that boat's over there, we sort of fly there, meet the boat, and then we've got to hire a car and drive it to all the events, get on ferries and things like that.
Do you hire a trailer, all that sort of stuff as well?
Yeah, so it's stored in a trailer in the shed.
And then I guess you're just cruising around, probably never been in the country.
Yeah.
Trying to get the hang of all the road conditions.
Yeah.
And then I guess you're linking up with other sailing clubs to find a place to berth the boat. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so fortunately our boats don't stay in the water overnight. So generally when we're going to an event, the yacht club will have a designated space on shore where we can keep trailers and keep the boats. So we'll pick up the boat, drive to a venue, drop the boat off and try and work out what they're saying, because don't speak Spanish and things like that, and try and find your accommodation and go shopping, get the food that you need.
I mean, that's stressful enough trying to find where you're staying, let alone lug a big boat around.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of your notable achievements so far, and it really has been impressive, and unfortunately 2020 kind of put the brakes on that. The current world ranking that you and Joel have in the 49er men's class is 25 in the world, which is an incredible achievement. But some really notable results from 2020. We'll probably start with the World Championships in Geelong, 15th in the world. Reflecting on that, I mean, how big a deal was that for you?
Yeah, Joel and I were unbelievably stoked with that result. That was that was the peak event, and that's what we'd been leading up to through the whole 2019 season. And when we were able to pull off the 15th at the Worlds, we were just so happy with how we'd performed. The result itself wasn't even the most important part. It was that we felt that we'd sailed at our absolute best at that time. We were just so happy.
Was it ahead of where you expected to be?
I mean, we always want a high goal. But for sure, like I said, we didn't set necessarily a performance goal and a certain position that we wanted to come. But we felt that 15th was probably, we deserved that, and we thought that was about where we were, and that was probably the best that we could perform at that time. We'd only been sailing together for a year and a half, and so we were really happy.
How do you observe what the competition is doing? I mean, how do you take away, I must be so busy.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you learn from the crews that do better than you? What can you pick from the action?
Yeah, so like I said, we sail quite a technical boat, and analysing sort of how they're setting up their boats is a difficult thing to do, and watching through the race course how they're sailing a shorter distance. Fortunately, at events, we all wear trackers, and you can re-watch the race with trackers and see the speed that everyone's going and where they're sailing, and sort of based on your debrief process, you might be able to work out, this boat went further right than you, and they made a gain out there. And then you're wondering if it was how they were sailing the boat or if it was the wind, and that's why your coach is really important after the race, is to be able to see and sort of deconstruct what happened.
An outstanding event for you and Joel at the 2020 Oceanic Championships, again in Geelong. That also formed part of the National Championships for Australia. So in the 49er class, you were first out of the Australian men, but you were fourth overall in that Oceanic event. Again, fantastic achievements. Was it... to win the Australian title, how does it sort of rank in your career so far?
Yeah, obviously a great feeling. Haven't won an open class nationals before, and so doing that was we were really happy with that. That was a great achievement, and that was the event leading a week before into the Worlds in Geelong. So that gave us a great lead-in and sort of great motivation to keep pushing, and we really, believe in ourselves and that we can do this.
So prior to that in 2019, some solid results, 19th at the Sailing World Cup in Japan, 29th at the World Championships in Auckland. We mentioned Weymouth in England, 30th at the European Championships. Do other nations race a bit different to Australians?
Yeah, I mean, we're all sailing the same boat and we're all sailing the same race. So there isn't too much that you can do differently. But for sure, the way that different nations approach training or they approach racing can definitely vary.
So 2020, COVID hits and most sports were affected greatly. How did the sailing world get impacted?
Yeah, like most things, it obviously got shut down quite quickly. Fortunately, in Australia, we're in a very lucky position in that now we're relatively open and we can train and things like that and travel interstate. Unfortunately, we can't go overseas just yet and compete internationally with all the Europeans, but we're now at a stage where at home we can train and move about and sort of hold our own domestic regattas. But the lack of racing that we're getting overseas is sort of having to change up how we're doing our own training. So because we can't race and we want to keep our racing skills sharp, we're trying to find other boats and other classes which are having races to keep working on those skills. So I've recently did the wind foil sort of nationals, which is windsurfing, which is similar to sailing. You're holding a sail, but you're standing on a surfboard. But then even more complicated, underneath the surfboard, there's a technical, it's an aerofoil, so a mini aeroplane wing. So that lifts you out of the water and you'd hydrofoil along and it's great fun. So that kind of racing is kind of how we're supplementing it right now.
I was going to ask you about that. So on your Instagram page, there's a picture of you doing that.
Yeah.
So is this just come out of COVID that you've had to find new water sports to keep busy, keep sharp?
Yeah, I've always loved windsurfing for the last couple of years, but I've recently done more and more just because the racing fleet locally is quite proficient and quite big. And so, like I said, trying to supplement our racing skills, if we can just get out and do races, that's the best thing that we can do right now.
Let's talk Olympics. Is Tokyo on the radar for you?
Yeah, Tokyo was the goal. Unfortunately, our qualification ended in Geelong at the World Championships, and two brothers from Victoria, they got the spot. We just missed out on.
So just one spot available for an Australian crew.
Yeah, exactly. So per class, there's only one team per class per country can go to the Olympics.
How do you reflect on that? Is it disappointment? Is it excitement that you have improved so much with Joel? You've only been sailing for, a little over a year. Reflecting on just missing that spot for Tokyo, I mean, how did it sit with you?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Obviously, it's a little bit disappointing because that was the big goal, was trying to go to the Tokyo Olympics. But at the same time, we felt that we'd sailed really well. And with our short time frame leading into Geelong, only sailing together for 1.5 years, like Will and Sam had been sailing the 49er for 15 years. So they've got plenty of experience. And we sort of felt that we'd come that far and we were so happy with how that we'd performed that missing out of the qualification wasn't really the end of the world, and we're still both young and we can push on towards the next one.
So thinking about it, how much does it burn in your mind Paris in 2024? Is that just the be all and end all to get there and compete?
That's definitely the goal. Yeah, and then probably I'm young enough to go to 2028 as well. But for sure, in the shorter term, 2024 is the goal.
Do you and Joel talk about it much?
Yeah,
You've got the same goals.
Yeah.
Do you actually talk about it too much and speak about your goals, or is it just stuff that is in your brain? You're both on the same page.
Yeah.
But yeah, elaborate on that. Do you share those sort of ambitions and talk about it a lot?
Yeah, it's really important to, especially because we're sailing so close to one another on the boat. If we didn't have aligned goals, then we'd probably end up going nowhere. So yeah, we speak about these things quite openly and about what we want to achieve. And Joel and I align quite closely, and so that's why we're a great team sort of moving forwards.
Olympic selection just in its own right is just, it's a significant achievement. But for you to get to Paris would be great. But what would you expect to achieve? Is it medal success, top 10 result? I mean, where are you sort of aiming the bar?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a gold medal is always the goal. But, medaling is realistically the most important thing, especially for the Australian sailing team and things like that. Medaling is always seen as the goal.
How's 2021 look with competition uncertainty? Even as we record today, the Olympics in Tokyo, it's slated, but there's probably, it's not 100% done deal.
Yeah.
How does the year look? Sort of maybe not quite knowing where you're going.
Yeah, it's blurry. We don't really know where we're going to go or where we're going to end up. I'm meant to be going to Melbourne on Monday, for example, but there's been a couple of cases down there now, so now we're not sure if we're even going to Melbourne. But the international competition we're probably not going to be going to the European season, which would start in about a month. There's then the Japanese leg, so we'd be heading over with the qualified team to train with them and help then build up into the Olympics. So that's a potential. And then our World Championships are in Abu Dhabi at the end of the year. And I guess that's probably the most likely event for us that we're going to be able to compete at this year. But like you said, we really just don't know.
A couple of questions on sailing before we chat about your time at UQ. When COVID did hit, how did it impact you? I mean, some people have taken the delay and break in competing in their stride, and it's actually been a nice time to decompress. Some have struggled with things in isolation, but where did it land for you, last year's disturbance?
Yeah, obviously a big disturbance for the whole world. And personally for me, I guess, like I said earlier, we're very lucky in Australia in that we aren't too badly impacted. I was able to increase my university loading due to the fact that we weren't able to go overseas and compete and spend so much time away like I usually do. So that was a good gain for me. And we were still able to train domestically. So Joel and I were still able to put the same number of hours on the water. Really the only thing we missed was international competition was the major loss.
And just finally, so being a part of the Australian sailing squad, that's the development path, but the goal is to make the Australian sailing team.
Yeah.
What do you need to do as a sailor to make that step up?
Yeah, so that's all based on results and how you go at international competitions. And while we're at home, we can't actually change our ranking. So realistically, we need to get overseas and compete and improve our results at key competitions like the Worlds or the Europeans and things like that. And there's different criteria depending on the boat that you sail and things like that to move that next step up.
It's fascinating how much of an impact international travel's had on nations like us. And European countries, they can, I guess, compete, right? So they're still getting that sort of active racing over there. Yeah,
there's a lot of the teams have sort of moved their base over to Vilamora and Portugal and sort of are training out of there as a way to train with other nations and get some racing practice in. Unfortunately, we can't access that, so we're just trying our best to simulate that domestically and doing what we can with the Australian fleet to try and build that, grow that, and try and increase our national competition.
Let's talk about your time at UQ. So studying Bachelors of Engineering Honours and Bachelor of Commerce degree. You're also a UQ Sports Achievement Scholarship recipient. What drew you to UQ to study those degrees?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I went to school at Brisbane Grammar School, and sort of moving into year 12, you have to make those decisions about what you want to do next year. And yeah, I felt that I wanted to go to uni, and I was drawn to engineering. And then after going to the different campuses and things like that, UQ really appealed to me. I thought the campus was great, the facilities were amazing, and the degree itself was it was quite highly regarded among almost the world, really. It's a really top-notch degree, and that's what pulled me towards UQ.
You mentioned just the training load alone is significant. I mean, let's just call it, say, 5 hours for a water session, setup, travel, training. How do you balance 2 degrees and all the sport that you do? How do you do it?
Yeah, so UQ Sport does an unbelievable job at making our job easier. They help us with timetabling, and they help us with different assessments and extensions and things like that. And with my degree, like a full course load would be 4 subjects per semester. I dropped down to 2 subjects when we go overseas and compete. And then, as I mentioned, I went up to 3 subjects last year because we weren't going overseas. And that ability to be flexible with the uni is really, it's instrumental to the fact that I can still do uni and train at the same time.
We have a lot of students that listen, especially this time of year, just starting out their uni degree, and there's a lot of people in your shoes trying to do elite level sport and study. If you could offer some advice to someone starting out, what would you say to them?
I would say just don't be afraid and just push into it, because the uni will help you in so many different ways, and it's unbelievably flexible. I know 20, 30 years ago, it would have been a lot harder to be able to do sport and uni at the same time. And now it's not easy, but it's definitely easier. And you can sort of lean on people, speak to people, ask questions, and there's plenty of other athletes at the uni that are more than happy to help you with what you're trying to do.
When you finish studying, where do you want to end up career-wise? Is there a bit of a goal in mind, or we'll just sort of see how it goes? Yeah,
ideally, I'd love to keep sailing and sort of get on the pro sailing circuit, which outside of, like, once I've done my Olympic sailing sort of thing, moving into pro sailing, which is sort of when you get on big boats and do yachting events and things like that. And I'd love to do a bit of that combined with using my engineering from uni and potentially in the sailing industry. So designing fast boats. And I don't know if you've heard of the America's Cup before, that's just on right now, actually. And those are really the most technologically advanced boats in the world. And I'd love to be on the sort of a design team or a testing team, or ideally sailing them. That would be the goal.
That'd be extremely fun.
Yeah.
2 quick ones before we finish. We've been lucky to have you represent UQ at Unisport Nationals.
Yeah.
Our UQ sailors have actually done quite well the last few years. So you went in 2018, we won a 3rd. That was the year UQ won the inaugural Nationals title. 2019, get my years mixed up. 2020 was a bit of a write-off. First, our sailing crew won 30 races during that competition, but I know it's not quite what you compete in at a tippy-top elite level, but what's that experience like, just going away for a university competition?
Yeah, no, the Uni Nationals is great fun, and it's actually quite high-level sport, because a lot of the sailors from interstate that sail other classes, a lot of them are also at uni. So I see a lot of my friends that I race against in the 49er and in lasers and other classes, they come up and do the events too. And teams racing is what we do at the Unisport Nationals, and that's where I learned to sail, was teams racing at school, because that's what the school events are running. And fortunately, when I was in year 8, year 9, the people that were in year 12 at my school, those are the people that I was racing with when I first joined uni, and they were in the Unisport team with me. So again, some really good mentors and some really high quality sailing, and it's a really enjoyable competition.
One final one, just to provide a bit of historical context for you. So in 2018, you won a half blue award at UQ. So our Blues Awards are the highest sporting honour that we have for a university student here. I just want to give you a bit of context on that achievement. Dating back to 1912, we've only had 37 blue or half blue recipients in sailing. So it's a mighty achievement to be part of such a select group. So congratulations on that. Been really nice to chat to you, Tom. Looking forward to what lies ahead, and we certainly wish you well in the pursuit for Paris 2024. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm unbelievably grateful for everything that the uni can do for me and all the infrastructure around it. It's a great program, and just really appreciative to be a part of it. So thank you for having me.
Thomas Needham there. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we have plenty more great guests coming up on the pod, including some of our 2021 UQ Sporting Scholarship recipients. Stay tuned for that, but before we do sign off, a shout out to our mates at the Queensland Brain Institute. It's where we record the show at UQ's stunning St Lucia campus. Okay, that's a wrap. We'll catch you next time on the Armchair Fan Podcast.